An orphan named Mary Ellen Wilson, born March 1864 to Francis and Thomas Wilson, was suffering from daily whoopings and beatings in her foster home. After Mary Ellen Wilson's father had passed away, her mother had to take an extra job because of poverty. Because of mispresentation, Mary was turned to the New York City Department of Charities. The New York Department of Charities placed little Mary Wilson under the care of Thomas and Mary McCormack. And right after that, her foster father, Thomas McCormack, has passed away. The foster mother then married Francis Connolly, and then they moved to New York into an apartment. It was then neighbors became aware of Mary Ellen's mistreatment. Miss Etta Wheeler, a Methodist missionary, had to check on the child. She had to see the mistreatment for herself, the severe physical abuse, neglect, and malnourishment. Mary Ellen Wilson received regular and severe beatings, insufficient food, and she was forced to sleep on the floor. At that time, there wasn't any laws or services for abused children, so Miss Wheeler decided to turn to a friend who was in charge of the ASPCA, which is the American Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals. That's when Mary Ellen Wilson was removed from her home and took to a foster mother was taken away to child. Mary Ellen Wilson's case went before a judge who convicted the foster mother of assault and battery and gave her a 1-year sentence. Physical abuse is when a caretaker inflicting physical injury on a child through assault. That includes corporal punishment that results in physical injuries like bruises, scratches, welts, or broken bones. And that's what Mary Wilson went through. Child abuse is when a parent or caretaker physically, emotionally, or sexually abuses, neglects, or abandons a child. Emotional abuse includes statements that can injure a child's sense of self-esteem. Examples of emotional abuse is called negative names, calling a child negative names, cursing, or insulting the child. Child abuse is a heartbreaking reality for many children, and it comes in many forms. It can be physical, sexual, or emotional abuse. Millions of children around the world are suffering and need someone to speak up on their behalf. Approximately 5 children die every single day because of child abuse. 90% of child sexual abuse victims know the perpetrator in some way, or they're abused by a family member. The child that has been sexually abused may exhibit sexual knowledge or behavior that's inappropriate for their age. In the U.S., more than 4 children die from child abuse and neglect on a daily basis. Child abuse is much more common. In the United States, each year, more than 3 million reports to child abuse are made. Each day, 4 or 5 children are killed by child abuse or neglect. Neglect is the most common of 4 basic types of child abuse. Children whose parents abuse alcohol or drugs are 3 times more likely to be abused and 4 times more likely to be neglected than any other children.
There are many theories for why a parent may abuse their pre-adolescent child, and since every case is different, we can only really go off of theories for casualty. One theory could be that the parent's childhood has an impact on why they're abusing their children now. Another theory could be that they had unrealistic expectations when having children. Another is lack of support, both emotionally and financially. There could also be drug and alcohol abuse that play a huge factor in why a parent may abuse their child. And also, emotional disorders and mental illness can play a role in an abusive family. These are just 5 common theories of casualty when discussing why a parent may abuse their pre-adolescent child. Our first theory of casualty are parents' childhood playing a role in why they may abuse their children. There have been many studies showing that if an adult was abused throughout their childhood, they're more likely to abuse their own children when they have them, due to a flawed family model. Another example that could come from the parent's childhood is if they were raised in a household with harsh methods of discipline, such as verbal abuse when the parent is angry, or being hit by their parents out of anger. They are more prone to violence in their later years with their own children if they have experienced this. This does not mean that a person who is abused will always go on to abuse their own children. However, according to statistics, they are more likely to because it's what they know and what they're familiar with. Another theory of casualty is that a parent may have unrealistic expectations in regards to what having and raising a child may be like. This is seen a lot in teen pregnancy and when younger people have a child without being truly ready. Many people have babies thinking that it will be easy or solve some kind of issue within their relationships or personal lives, but are very surprised to find out how much time, care, attention, and money goes into raising a child. This can cause a lot of added stress to an already stressful environment and may lead to a parent using their child as an outlet for their anger. According to an Oregon State University study, parents may be abusive if they are resentful of a child who is handicapped or difficult to handle because they require more time and attention than what was expected. Did you know that parenthood is the leading cause of school dropout for teen girls? Lack of support, both emotionally and financially, is another common theory in searching for the answer to why a parent may abuse their child. Can you imagine being alone with a newborn, never having a child before, or even being alone with multiple children, having no friends and no family to turn to for help, and little financial assistance to support yourself and the child or children? This situation can cause a parent to become extremely stressed out with no outlet, and with that child being the only one around, they tend to become the outlet for relieving stress and tension. Any parent will tell you that it is essential to have a form of emotional support and financial support when raising a child. Friends and family are key support systems for any mother or father, and having a job or source of income is imperative to making sure that a child has a great life. Alcohol and drug abuse may be one of the most obvious theories when people think about child abuse. Before we explain this, it is very important to know that not all abusers are drug and alcohol users, and not all drug and alcohol users are abusers. That being said, the reason that this is considered a factor is because these substances tend to cause people to lose self-control, according to the helpguide.org. Statistics show that parents who do in fact abuse drugs and alcohol are 3 times more likely to abuse their children and 4 times more likely to neglect them. Drugs and alcohol are known to be enhancers for many different emotions, such as sadness and depression, but especially anger and rage. The most dangerous time and place for a child is in a drug and alcohol-induced family. A parent under the influence has little to no control over their own actions, and maintaining the substances they are abusing are more important to them than their own children at most times. The last theory that we will mention is emotional disorders and mental illness. Some common examples of disorders that are linked to abuse are anxiety disorders, depression, bipolar disorder, and PTSD, which is short for post-traumatic stress disorder and is actually very common in mothers. These disorders and illnesses cause the parent to enter into an extreme emotional state of mind, which in turn can cause them to abuse their children. These illnesses and disorders that many of the abusers experience prevent them from being able to manage and cope with the stresses associated with parenting and even everyday life. They often have a very difficult time caring for both themselves and their children. Most often, these emotions are accompanied by anger and resentment that leave them neglectful and less able to care for others. Not all parents who experience these disorders are abusers, though if left untreated, the chances are greater.
When I began researching the prevalence of this topic, I quickly found that it is a topic that is not as highly reported in many countries as it is here in America. While the exact study was individualized for each of the countries, most of the reporting was generalized rather than individualized. In the U.S., statistics show that 78.1% of child abuse and neglect cases reported are committed by parents, and 54.1% of the total perpetrators were female. Globally, child abuse is just not as recognized. Sexual abuse, however, the statistics vary between countries and reports, but are consistently alarming. Research indicates that up to 36% of girls and 29% of boys have suffered child sexual abuse. Up to 46% of girls and 28% of boys have experienced sexual coercion. Studies from many countries in all regions of the world suggest that up to 80 to 98% of children suffer physical punishment in their homes, with a third or more experiencing severe punishment resulting from the use of implementation. It is important to realize just how great that percentage is here in the U.S. of female perpetrators, because if you focus on the fact that 78.1% of perpetrators are the parents, and more than half of those are the females, it does show that maternal abuse occurs more often than paternal abuse towards the children. A Child Called It is the unforgettable account of one of the most severe child abuse cases in California history. It is the story of Dave Pelzer, who was beaten and starved by his emotionally unstable, alcoholic mother, who played unpredictable and torturous games with him that nearly killed him, time and time again. He had to learn how to play his mother's games in order to survive, because she no longer considered him a son or a boy, but an it. He lived on an old army cot in the basement. His clothes were torn up. And when his mother actually allowed him food, it was nothing more than some garbage scraps that even the dogs refused to eat. However, nobody knew about the nightmare that Dave was living. He had no one and nothing to turn to except his dreams that kept him alive. He was abused from the age of 4 until he was rescued by teachers and social workers at 12, weighing a mere 68 pounds. Today, Dave is recognized as one of the nation's most effective and respected communicators addressing corporate groups, conventions, and human service professionals. The following video will tell us a little bit about what it was like from his shoes and how he reflects upon the actions his mother took on him when he was younger, even going as far as talking about what it was like to interview his mother later on in his life to hear how she felt about the situation. So, please take the time and watch the following video.
Our next guest on this extraordinary evening with extraordinary people is Dave Pelzer, who turned his monumentally abusive childhood into a way of inspiring people to survive and thrive in the face of adversity. Using adversity as a plus, he's authored 5 best-selling books. You had a horrific childhood.
It was challenging at best.
Tell us about it.
I was raised in the Bay Area, and unfortunately my mother was an alcoholic, and for whatever the reason decided to vent her rage on me. From the age of 4. Well, there was 3 of us at the time. But
all of them got hit?
No, just myself. We used to call it target child selection, which the perpetrator selects one child at random to vent their rage or whatever. And it got to the point when I was age 4, I knew I was in trouble for things I didn't even do. To the point at age 5 or 6, I was isolated to live in a basement, perform chores. My brothers weren't allowed to even look at me, to the point where I was either stabbed or starved for 14 days or burned on a gas stove or to swallow ammonia for these fictional crimes that I never committed.
Where was your father?
My father was a fireman in San Francisco. But I think back at that time, Larry, I mean, the mentality was men brought home the bacon and let the women, not the wives, lovers, or friends, take care of business. And
but he didn't know what his wife was doing to
him. By the time he understood what was going on, it was way out of control, and he didn't want to deal with her wrath as well. He was a passive observer. And it was a tragedy within a tragedy.
Was she always drunk when doing this?
I'd say in the latter years, yes. But she was very premeditated in what she would do, how she would treat me when my brothers weren't around, the neighbors weren't around, how much she could hide from the teachers when I ran to school, of course, to go to class.
Did you ever think of complaining to a teacher?
Oh, back then, we never said no to our parents. We never finked on our parents, per se. I mean, a lot of things were kept in the closet. I just had to learn at a very young age, if my mom doesn't feed me, I steal water. If my mom goes to strike me, I just try to tighten up parts of my body.
Now, I read here that you actually your mom wanted you to lie down on top of a lit cook stove so she could watch you burn?
Yes, and that was that one incident in which minutes before that, my mom had burned my arm on a gas stove. And then, of course, as you said, to have me lay down on the gas stove, that was the one turning point in my life, because I had her hit me. I was about 7. So I had her hit me rather than burn me, so it was the lesser of 2 evils. And thank goodness my brother Ronald came home early from this situation. My mother tosses me down to the bottom of the basement. I purge, I cry, I let it out, and then I felt the blisters from the palm of my hand to my bicep. And that's when I realized, Larry, if I can feel these blisters, I'm alive, which means I'm not dead, which means I can manipulate, I can win. And that was the turning point in my life. I raised my hand to myself and to God, and I said, from this moment on, I will never quit, and I'll give everything my best shot.
How long did you live with her?
Until I was rescued at age 12. And it was
arrested?
Rescued.
Rescued
by 4 teachers, a nurse and a principal, who put their careers on the line at the time, because we didn't have penal codes that we have now to protect children or to protect those trying to protect children. So it was a very dramatic...
He took you away from the house?
Immediately.
And what did your father say?
My father was separated from my mom at the time.
The brothers remained?
Yes, which was unfortunate, because I remember going to my social worker and saying, hey, if you're going to rescue me, you have to take care of my brothers. But because of the... I think at age 12 I weighed 68 pounds, 68, 70 pounds. My case was rather gratuitous, and the social workers were saying, hey, we'll take care of you, let's see what happens next, but let's take care of you now, which wasn't fair to my brothers who had feeding. Once one child's removed, they have a tendency to feed.
Do you love your mother?
Well, you know who I love, Larry? I love my mommy, who is the most beautiful creature on this planet. The best cook in the world, would do anything for her husband and her children. But the more she drank, and with the hatred from her abusive past, the more she became less of the mommy figure and more she became what I called the mother.
She passed away?
Both of them are deceased. But I had a chance to interview her before she passed away.
You interviewed her?
Yes, because I used to be in counseling, and I used to work in juvenile hall and
How did she explain herself?
She didn't.
What did she say?
She basically said when she had stabbed me, that was an accident. And her mentality was, if I can forgive her for the most incredible atrocity, then I had to forgive her for all the smaller things. Which tells me, Larry, that the alcohol did not subdue her memory, and she knew exactly what she was doing at that time, which makes her to me more deadly.
Therefore, the puzzlement of all is why?
Why?
Why you?
Why
not the others?
Why
you? Why would a mother harm a child?
She could have picked on any of my siblings, or brothers rather. She just happened to pick on me.
But why?
There's no answer to that. I've talked to other law enforcement psychiatrists and so forth, and they call it target child selection. These perpetrators pick a child at random, but they do it at an age that which they won't tell. I probably was abused between the ages of 2.5 and 3.
How did you get from that to this?
I always knew as a child, if I can survive what I did without a lot of help, without, let's say, a college degree, without a Phil Jackson giving me play-by-play, if I can do that, then I can. It took me 6 months to join the Air Force. I didn't speak very well. I was uncoordinated. But I made a decision, if I can survive my first 12 years, I can do this. I had a strong work ethic. In junior high, I worked 40 hours a week because I knew I can work when I was a child.
Who did you live with? Who was raising you?
Oh, I had several foster parents. And as you know, the social workers, police officers, and foster parents never get a fair shake. And here I am, have the opportunity, the privilege of seeing and being on your show and talking to you. And you're looking at 20 years or maybe 8 years of solid work from these people who just invested so much time and energy into me. So my son can go to college. It's that old American dream. You come from less than humble beginnings. You adopt the mentality, if you can survive cancer, then you can survive the flu. I always knew in my heart, if I can survive this as a kid, I can do anything.
So you write books, you do motivational speaking on this topic, right?
On resilience. A lot of people with a narrow mind say, oh, he's about abuse. I'm always about resilience, responsibility with a sense of honor.
Can you teach it?
Can I teach it? I teach it to my son. That's the most important thing in my life, to give him strong values and a sense of his accord, what I expect of him, and to be nice to his fellow man, and to be responsible for his actions.
Did you keep in touch with your brothers while you were in the foster homes?
I tried, but my mom, of course, had a lockdown.
How about your dad?
My dad, a little bit, and my dad, of course, was homeless before he passed away, which was a tragedy, and he died in my arms. Yeah, he was asked to retire from the fire department in San Francisco.
Did you get a pension?
I don't know if he did. He probably did. My mom probably got that. But I got to see my dad before he passed away, which was really tragic. He couldn't talk.
So what do you do now?
What do I do now? Let me see. Make sure my son stays in college.
And you do speaking?
Lots of speaking. I work a lot with the armed forces now with the war going on. I'm kind of a Robin Williams meets Dr. Phil. Do a lot of comedy. The books. Work a lot in social services, law enforcement. Just down the street, Coachella Valley, Rancho Mirage. I'm the self-imposed chancellor of Homeland Security. You gotta like that. And a friend of mine says, hey, what about the Al-Qaeda? And I said, have we been attacked? Then shut up. I'm doing my job.
You grew up with Al-Qaeda.
I did. Yeah, she was my Bin Laden, Larry.
Thank you, Dave.
God bless you, sir. Thank you.
God bless you. Dave Pelzer. What is...
As Dave mentioned in the video, his mother did not think that she was doing anything wrong. What I'd like to point out is that although Dave had been through all of these experiences in his life, he is able to parent his children correctly and to have a good emotional bond with them rather than having a detached bond with them. I think that's important to note because some of the risk factors that increase abuse are typically if a parent is abused by their parent. So in this situation, if a mother was abused by her mother. Another thing that is very highly reported on is the bonding in postpartum. So after a mother has her baby, if she does not correctly bond with her baby, she is more likely to have an avoidance bond with her child rather than having a strong and supportive bond. I believe that it's also very important for a mother to have a support group. So for mothers who are single parents who maybe lost their partner due to the severing of a relationship, or their partner maybe lost their life or walked out on them, it's important for mothers to have support groups such as their friends, their church, or even just community support groups for women in this similar situation, in order to have a bond where they can come together and help each other parent their children rather than feeling the frustrations that come with being a parent by themselves. I think that it's also important to know that when victims are asked by by people in authority whether or not that they have been abused, this could also increase the amount of abuse that's going on in a home. For example, with Dave's story, when the school officials questioned the mother about whether or not she had been hurting Dave, he was then locked into the basement for a week with no food, and she forced him to drink bleach, vomit it back up, and drink it again repeatedly because he had been caught stealing food at school because he was so hungry. And another risk factor that increases abuse in the home is the presence of substances. So when there's substances in the home, as we earlier touched on, it makes it a lot harder for the parents to have stability as well as to control their frustration that comes along with parenting. When I was growing up, it was very hard for me to understand how my mother could go from one mood to another so suddenly. Later on in life, my mother was diagnosed with bipolar disorder, which increased the abuse that was going on in my home, especially when paired with substance abuse. I think that a lot of what happened in my mother's specific scenario is the fact that she had been through a lot of abuse in her life, and instead of knowing how to parent in a way that was constructive, she took out her frustrations, and sometimes it was on an object, but most of the time it was through emotional and verbal abuse that thankfully later on in life we were able to repair through therapy. But it's very important to realize that a lot of times in abuse situations, the perpetrator doesn't realize the harm that they're causing in that given moment, and they need the help that we have talked about in order to really make a sound repair to the relationship with their children.
Reactive attachment disorder occurs in children who have been neglected or abused and do not form healthy attachments with their caregivers, usually the mother, before the age of 5. Attachment disorder shows children flinching away from physical touch, not wanting to be held or cuddled, and children showing fear of not being in control. They will show anger and aggression and throw tantrums. The children will show an unnatural amount of affection for strangers while showing little affection for the parent or caretaker. The child will also show no guilt or remorse after behaving badly due to an underdeveloped conscience. They may also show a fear of going home with their caretaker when they are outside of the home. Physical abuse in early childhood can cause brain injury and brain damage. This brain damage can lead to learning disabilities later in life. Neglect and maltreatment through lack of nutrition and physical violence, such as shaking, to young children can cause the brain to not develop well. Abuse of young children may also lead to permanent physical damage of the central nervous system as a whole, causing lifelong disability. The stress of abuse can cause children to act out. They will display an unhealthy amount of aggression, especially towards peers and caregivers. They may have a hard time showing emotion because all that they see and experience at home is aggression and anger. Adolescents may become depressed and withdrawn from others because they have been deprived of normal expressions of love, security, worthiness, and the feeling of being wanted. Young girls who have been abused tend to internalize the anger, and it may cause physical ailments accompanying the depression. These ailments include headaches and abdominal pain.
Because of little support at home and lower intellectual function found in children who are abused, they tend to do poorly academically. They will also have few friends at school because of their inability to connect to others. These children tend to have more absences from school and show a lack of interest and inability to concentrate during class. They may also have poor hygiene and may not have had their needs attended to, such as getting corrective lenses for vision problems or getting required immunizations. The neglect of these basic care needs can also put a child's education in jeopardy. Children who have been physically abused may lash out in school by bullying others, especially young boys. Children of abuse have not been taught how to correctly handle and control their emotions. Young children who have been abused tend to self-stimulate sexually and may make inappropriate sexual advances to older adults in an attempt to connect and feel less stressed. They may also manipulate adults in order to get some sort of attention. Children who have been physically abused show antisocial tendencies such as withdrawal, avoidance, fear, anger, and aggression. As preadolescents who have been physically abused reach adolescence, they tend to engage in more risky behaviors. These behaviors include suicide attempts, drug use, running away and homelessness, early sexual behavior including prostitution, and gang involvement. These adolescents also tend to begin to blame themselves for the abuse they had to endure as a child. They refer to themselves as bad and feel as though their punishment was earned and deserved. Those who abuse their children have to face legal ramifications for their actions. During an investigation of abuse, a child who is seen to be in immediate danger will be removed from the parent and placed with relatives or in the foster care system. Mothers found to be abusing their children will face a court hearing and will be given options to complete parenting classes and counseling in order to regain custody of their children. During the process of the parenting classes and any other recommendations made by the courts, the child will usually stay in the custody of the courts or with someone other than the parent. There will be provisions put in place for possible visitation during this time. In the case of low risk of harm to child, the parent may be allowed to have the child stay with them in the home, but they will have to comply with in-home support services. If the child is taken out of the home and placed into foster care, there is a plan for permanency put in place. This will be reviewed every 12 months to see if the best permanent place is with the family or continues to be somewhere other than the home. There is a possibility that the parent could lose custody permanently. In severe cases, the parent may even have criminal charges brought up against them and they may face jail time. No matter the severity, the parent will be placed on a child maltreatment registry, indicating that they have been found to have abused or maltreated a child. This registry is mostly used for agency purposes to track repeat offenders, but the registry may also come up when the perpetrator has a background check ran on their name. They may not be able to get jobs that involved working with or caring for children.
Some solutions for addressing the issue of maternal abuse in preadolescent children are parenting classes, therapy for both the abuser and the victim, various support groups for both the abuser and the victim, emergency shelter drop-offs for parents who can't deal with what it takes to be a parent, This is an alternative to abuse that is offered in every state. For example, a parent may bring their child to a police station or fire department, and there are trained professionals who will assist in providing care for the child and help for the parent if they want it. Narcotics Anonymous meetings and Alcoholic Anonymous meetings for parents experiencing drug abuse. Treatment by licensed professionals for parents with emotional disorders and mental illness. This includes any type of doctor trained to evaluate and treat these disorders in primary care units and hospitals. And last but not least, assisted living and financial support from various agencies, both government and nonprofit organizations. There are tons of resources available to mothers who need assistance and do not have a job, a home, or any other kind of support necessary for taking care of themselves or a child.
Imagine being 7 years old and experiencing abuse, neglect, and maltreatment. I'm talking harm that's being done by your parents or your grandparents. People that are supposed to love you, care for you, provide for you, but instead they're choosing to hit you with belts. They're choosing to not feed you food, or even worse, making you take ice-cold showers for punishment. This was the reality of Antonio Radar. Antonio Radar was a 7-year-old boy whose mother, named Mary C. Radar, brutally beaten him, falsely imprisoned him, and endangered his life. And also his own grandmother, Deanna Bailey, played a role in the assault as well. When asked why they chose to do this, they simply said one sentence, one statement. They didn't like him. That's what they said. They didn't like him. This isn't a case about liking him. You're supposed to be loving him. You're supposed to be providing for him. You're supposed to be supporting him. But anyhow, the case ended with Antonio's mother, Mary Radar. She was sentenced from 5.5 to 15 years in prison. And Deanna Bailey, his grandmother, was sentenced between 5 to 10 years. Antonio was taken to the hospital. Once he was at the hospital, he was able to get food and nutrition for his body. He gained 24 pounds within a few weeks being in the hospital. And once he was stable, Child Protective Services came and took him and brought him to the foster care system. As we have just learned, the intervention taken for Antonio Radar was immediate hospitalization, and once he was stable, placed into the foster care system. However, as we can see on this slide, that is not the only intervention that can be taken for abused children. Usually, Child Protective Services officials get reports from school, from a police officer, or even a social worker that they suspect that a child is being abused. Child Protective Services perform their duty by investigating the report. Child Protective Services also take the child from the house or home and bring the child into a clinic or even the hospital to have medical examination being done by a doctor. Medical examinations are performed to help evaluate the severity of the abuse performed on the body and or the mind. These examinations are performed by a doctor that do a full head-to-toe assessment. In doing these assessments, the doctor finds out whether there are internal trauma done to any major body organ, and they also find out whether there are broken ribs and or broken bones in the body. Once the medical examination is complete, if the Child Protective Services deem or see fit that the child is indeed being abused, they decide to take the next step, which is child placement services. Child placement services are places that Child Protective Services and or the government use to help take care of children that are abused or that are being neglected by either their parent or guardianship. In Antonio's case, it was the foster care system. However, you also have adoptions that take place. Either way that the children goes, mandatory therapy is usually performed. A type of therapy that is done for children is therapeutic daycare. This daycare is not filled with books and the movies or colorful crayons that bring smiles to children's eyes. No, instead this daycare, it provides comfort and therapy. Either they are doing role play, or they could do drawings, or they could make short stories. Either way, the psychologists use these therapies to find out what exactly occurred in the home, how the child feels, and it helps deal with problems with attachment, self-concept, emotional behaviors, and physical problems. Therapeutic daycare have many great results that psychologists have found. The improvements are not only in emotional behaviors, but social, cognitive, and fine gross motor skills. However, the therapist or the social worker can help the child build conflict management skills as well. In doing these conflict management skills, the results are better management of stress, control of their emotion and their behavior, and being able to appropriately express feelings without the use of harm. Oftentimes, abuse takes place because of lack of patience, lack of education, or it could simply be traditions that we have seen being used by our parents and grandparents while raising us. To combat these reasons, social workers and psychologists came together to have parent training classes. In these classes, they help demonstrate and educate helpful tips and techniques when dealing with children. An example is child management. Mothers learn to talk to a child versus yelling at them or hitting them. Mothers learn to remove toys and games rather than removing love and care. Mothers provide advice to the child rather than letting the child figure things out on their own. Wolf, a psychologist, have found reports that mothers reported fewer behavior problems, and it also decreased the risk of maltreatment when compared with other mothers who never taken part in parent training class. Another intervention is called parent-child interaction therapy. It usually involves a mother and a child in a room interacting and conversing together. A counselor is usually behind a one-sided window and is watching and observing every interaction that is taking place. The mother usually has an earpiece in her ear, which she will be listening to the counselor providing tips and techniques for certain behaviors that the child does. An example is temper tantrum. The counselor would advise the mother to ignore and continue doing whatever activity that she was doing, because all the child usually wants in a temper tantrum is attention. So if you choose not to provide the attention that it's desperately seeking, the child would end up stopping and end up cooperating and remaining cool and calm. But sometimes it's not even lack of patience or lack of education. Sometimes it's mental health disorders, bipolar, schizophrenia, post-traumatic stress disorders. These disorders are disorders that lead to violence. However, with medication, with counseling, with follow-up therapy, mothers can be loving, and caring to their child. If all of these interventions, treatments, or even technique doesn't work, a route that can be taken, as in the case of Antonio Rada, is prison.